Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our MSP Mastered webcast. Our topic today is best practices for analyzing and troubleshooting networks. And I'll be joined by my special guest, Alex Hoff from Auvik, to deliver today's webcast. Thanks again for spending about 60 minutes of your time with us working on the business rather than in the business. So today's topic is all about finding more efficient and better ways to troubleshoot, analyze, and resolve not only incidents that occur on networks, but recurring problems and identifying the root cause of those. So we're going to really get into some old school tools, and we'll get into some new school tools, as well as processes and tactics to help you more quickly identify and troubleshoot these networks. I'd really like to welcome Alex Hoff to today's webcast. Alex, you're co-founder and chief product officer for Auvik Networks, and you and I have spent some time really putting together what I think is going to be a great series of tips and techniques for our audience today. I'd like to thank you for joining us and ask you to just introduce yourself and let our attendees know a little bit about yourself, your background, and Auvik Networks before we dive into today's topic.
Thanks, Eric. Where do I start? A little bit about myself. It's not my first networking business. I started my career as a co-op student very early on, and I fell in love with networking, worked at Alcatel-Lucent back as a co-op student, joined a technology company called Sandvine, and I've spent many an hour in labs late at night setting up gear, setting up lab trials. And so I think I've cut my teeth when it comes to configuring and debugging networks. This experience at Auvik has been really fun. The personal story here is I quit my job when my wife was pregnant and said, hey, let's go start a company. No time like the present. Nothing like a little bit of motivation to get going. And so fast forward a couple, 8 years now. I've got 3 kids through this experience, a lot more gray hair than that photo shows. And, I like to call them 200 kids at work, but it's been an amazing ride, and I'm very happy to be here today.
Well, I appreciate the entrepreneurial spirit. And there's no time to jump in, but the present. And hey, it's great to hear that today's collaboration is really going to be a 1-2 punch between a couple of folks that have cut their teeth in the enterprise, in engineering, in technology, and as a result of I think the topic and the abstract that we sent out today. We've got a tremendous amount of response, and I would assume it's going to be a lot of our technicians and engineer friends on today's webinar. So I'm looking forward to really getting into some of these nuts and bolts. So thanks again for joining us. All right, so here's what I want to do. I want to get everybody kind of geeked up and participating in today's webinar. So I've got a couple of polling slides, and I'm going to launch the first one. So help us out by answering this question, please. Have you ever experienced a tough networking issue that took way too long to resolve? Now, Alex, in my experience, sometimes we overlook some of the simplest things and run down these, crazy rabbit holes, and then come to find out that somebody taps us on the shoulder and says something like, well, have you thought of this? And you're like, oh, how could I have overlooked that, right? I mean, how many times has that happened to everybody?
Yeah, I think when I do these presentations, usually in person, I ask them, raise your hands if you've ever had to go on site and trace wires and troubleshoot network problems to find your root cause. And, when people don't raise their hands, I'm like, dude, you're either lying to me or you're lying to yourself. You've never had to do this. It's just one of those things that it's part of being in the MSP business, is that networks suck. They're complicated. There's so many vendors, and it's a real pain. So we got a couple people here who've answered yes, or actually the vast majority here, a couple of people who are no, and maybe they're new to the business.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the folks that kind of don't raise their hand in events. I always say, those of you that aren't going to raise your hand, just let me know now. Just wink at me, let me know. So I'll stop asking. All right, let's see. I want to make sure that we can see my slide now. Can you see that, Alex?
Yeah, I can. I see poll number 1 there. All right.
I want to make sure I'm out of the poll. All right. So let's kind of, look at some of these common network issues. And those of you that are on the webinar today, go ahead and throw some up that we may have missed so that we can, just kind of give everybody a good round understanding of the kind of things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. I mean, there are user issues, right, Alex? That, look, my password, I forgot my password, I'm on vacation or whatever, I can't log in. And there's network issues, and some of these things are, typical day-to-day things. And then there are some things that are caused by things that we weren't expecting, right? Heavy network traffic, or maybe, folks trying to, attack us or impact us in some certain way. So there are kind of these benign things, these people things, they're network issues, infrastructure things, or maybe device things, or maybe bad cables. I mean, it runs the gamut, right?
Yeah. So I've seen lots of issues in my carrier networking days. We were trying to chase packet loss at a knock center, or a knock center somewhere in the southern U.S. And turns out that one had to do dust in fiber optic cables. And it's like, geez, these aren't things that you can really figure out. You have to go on site to figure that out. But in my experience here with MSPs, these are all the things, like, how many MSPs have had the complaint from a client saying my network is slow? Like, yeah, of course, that is the single most vague and challenging question that an MSP technician has to deal with. Yeah. And then there's the more nefarious things like network loops. Network loops are the bane of your existence because they happen because of, largely because of shadow IT. Someone sees a dangling cable and they accidentally plug it in. I've got a story from a partner in the UK that had a tech on site doing server maintenance. They were in the server room doing, normal server stuff that I'm not very good at. But a employee of this company was just walking down the hall. They saw a dangling patch cable and they said, oh, I should plug this back in. They looped it back into the wall, thinking they were doing the right thing. Well, for those networking experts out there, what's going to happen? They don't have spanning tree set up. You're going to create a loop. The loop's going to have a broadcast packet go through it. Then it's going to loop forever and create a broadcast storm. That broadcast storm is effectively a denial of service attack to your network. So in this scenario, people freaked out. They locked the guy in the server room. Server room guy called his MSP boss. They had to send another technician on site. Like, it was just an entire day productivity lost because someone non-maliciously decided to plug something in. And it's like, geez, without the visibility, this is a real pain.
Yeah, and they don't think they're doing anything wrong, right? I remember having a client that had one of their employees, basically they didn't want to type on their desk with their laptop. They wanted to, slide back, put their feet up on the desk and type on their laptop on their lap. Well, the network cable wasn't long enough. So what they do, they brought in like a home, Wi-Fi router and plugged it in. So
we've seen
unsecure and just, are you kidding me? Right. So, hey, bless their heart. They think
what's worse about that is then those home routers will do DHCP on your network and really mess things up.
Oh yeah.
My other favorite example is an MSP was prospecting and they did the typical thing where they say, how many switches do you have? Eventually they started like, hey, where does this cable go? And they started tracing it and it went up into the ceiling tiles. And lo and behold, there was a daisy chain set of managed switches in there down the run of the building because they were too cheap to put in a fiber run. So they just had a bunch of managed switches sitting in ceiling tiles, kind of hanging together to get that cable run. And it's like, oh man, that's a ticking time bomb waiting to happen.
Gotta love it. Gotta love it. Yeah. So we're getting some chat and Q&A. Yeah. IP conflicts. It's all these things that just keep our days interesting, right? All right. Let's take a look at kind of some of the old school stuff, right? That we cut our teeth on when we were learning, kicking it old school, that check the cable thing. I've been a culprit of this where, oh no, let me check, everything else, but holy cow, it's a bad cable. It's not terminated right or got frayed or something. The other thing that, I remember from working in these networks back in the day is coming behind, the previous IT provider, right? And taking over an account and just seeing that they've just got every network protocol just lit up on every device, right? So you've got all this broadcast going on and now you've got to quiet this stuff down to try to really, get a better performance out of the network. There's our basic networking tools. We're going to take a few seconds to talk about each one of these. And I love, I always used to walk around and identify, it's always DNS. So look there, right? But is it really? Is it really? Maybe not always, but a lot of the times really understanding networking and, true networking and how things work is really important when we're training our staff. I mean, we used to have, lunch Fridays, we'd bring the staff in and we'd talk about troubleshooting some scenario and learning about, subnetting and things like that. It was really, really helpful. And I love, the go-to, well, just reboot everything, right? Reboot everything and see what happens, or unplug everything. Now, we've run out of, the best options, or our bag of tricks, or our acumen or competence in troubleshooting that particular situation has, is not up to par, right, Alex?
For sure. I think when we were putting this deck together, I thought it was just great to kind of go back to first principles. Like, we could talk about software vendors, and I can do my sales pitch if you want, but it's like, hey, let's make sure that everyone has that same basic level of understanding. So when I saw this concept of let's kick it old school, I was like, oh, brings me back to my good old days. And I got to tease you, Eric, because most of your screenshots as we go through this are Windows-based, and in a real network nerd like myself, you got to be running a Unix variation.
That's why it's going to be such a good 1-2 punch, because I think from an attendee perspective, right, we have a lot of our technicians and engineers are working on Windows environments and things like that. And, truth be told, yeah, when I had my MSP, we were a Windows shop. We were also a Cisco shop. So I did appreciate some of your feedback and guidance on saying, oh, let's do some of these, we'll get into some more advanced stuff. Let's do some show commands and maybe look at some iOS stuff on the back end, the true networking stuff, because I think there's a natural evolution where, you start off when you bring in a technician or engineer and they work their way up typically through, the tiers or levels of support, right? Level 1 tech, or tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, networking engineers as well. And I think that, we got a great slide. I won't give it away, but it talks about, that dragon slaying engineer, and this is the person that really understands everything, but not everyone in the organization always has that ability to get that training quickly, right? They've got to work through that and work their way up until they're, they get tapped on the shoulder and says, okay, we're going to send you to advanced networking training, or we're going to send you to, this specific vendor's networking training, because, I think you'll agree, Alex, different vendors look at networking differently. Like, there is what I call the Cisco networking, which is different than other types of networking philosophies. Would you agree?
Absolutely. There's, we released a report last year. There are 100 different switch vendors across our partner base here at Auvik. Like, that to me is ridiculous when you think of the complexity compared to Windows. There's a handful of versions of Windows. Think of all the 100 different ways switch vendors have implemented their CLI. Like, that's hard. That's crazy hard.
Yeah. And I'm a command line guy, but now what we're seeing is all these different vendors now are kind of promoting the GUI to, hey, trying to make it simpler and simpler. And I'm always like, okay, well, I always knew on the command line where to go, what to do, right? But if you're dealing with multiple different switches and it's all these different GUIs, I mean, it's hard to keep up with that kind of stuff when you're an MSP and trying to, normalize or standardize on 1 or 2 services or solutions, because you've always got to keep up with, the new release of the GUI. I mean, CLI, right? Yep.
It's kind of baked. It's tried and true.
Yep. All right. So let's get into some of these kicking it old school basic networking tools. I mean, who doesn't know about, speed test, right? Speedtest.net just gives us a quick and dirty idea of, are we within acceptable parameters for the bandwidth that the client is paying for, right? So jumping over to speedtest.net, dropping in an IP address or from the location and seeing what that download and upload speed looks like.
Yeah, like, I think it's good to run this twice, right? So if you have a user that's complaining about poor performance, it's not always the internet connection. It could be the core network. It could be the wireless. And so once on that specific host, maybe it's the CEO's Microsoft Surface. Well, maybe he has poor speed test performance here. Maybe he's getting like 3 meg, because he's too far from the AP. Maybe it's not an internet issue. Maybe it's just a distance issue. So that's why I like when we talk about speed test, get 2 vantage points. Run it from their domain controller, run it from one of their servers,
Exactly.
and then run it from the host in question to really kind of troubleshoot and pinpoint a problem.
Right. And sometimes, you know, there's processes that are going on, updates and whatnot. So it could be also what else is sucking on the pipe at that particular moment in time, right?
For sure. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but yeah.
Yep. Hey, the favorite, right? Ping. I mean, it's like one of the first things you learn. Hey, ping it. See what the response is. Are you getting a response? So you're pinging a known IP address outside to see if you get a reply back, to see if there is, you know, and this is one of those, okay, is it DNS questions, right? Or what is it?
Yeah, so it's like, you know, with ping, if you can't resolve Google, that's a problem. Do you have an IP address? Can you ping the next hop? Can you ping the router? Can you ping the gateway? And we'll talk about traceroute in a second, but ping is your fundamental. It's your friend. You know, we'll talk a little bit about how some more advanced tools can help you troubleshoot, but if you're not familiar with ping, get familiar. This is going to be the easiest and best tool that you can use to help troubleshoot network connectivity problems.
Yep. It's part of the Swiss Army knife, probably the first thing that you whip out when you're troubleshooting. And here's traceroute. So this one actually helps identify all of the hops between where you are and what you're trying to ping and get a reply back from, right, Alex? So it kind of lets you know where there's a problem all throughout that. So is it a hop? Is it something else that's happening? So talk to us about this.
Yeah, so let's hone in on line 1 there. You know, we're doing a trace route to speedguide.net. Perfect. So we've got the DNS. We're going to find our path to go through all the different core routers. But when you're troubleshooting, typically at a small, medium business, you're not going to have layers and layers of routing in a small, medium business. You're going to have that core router, the default gateway, 192.168.1.1 in this case.
Yep.
So when you're trace routing to 8888, which is Google's DNS, can we get to that first hop? If we can't get there, we've got some local problems. If we get to there, but then we get to the 68, 152, 184. If we can get to that one, that means that we're good till we leave the network. It's somewhere in the internet problem. Maybe there's a BGP problem, who knows? But once it's left the current, the local network, it's kind of out of your hands, unfortunately. I hate to say this, but
Yep.
if you can make it to the internet, then it's an internet problem. Then you got to get on the horn with Comcast, Time Warner, whoever you're working with, and try and troubleshoot with them. Or it's just the tubes are broken and there's nothing we can do about that. But I think it's just, can you ping your default gateway? That's the thing you should be looking at. Very basic stuff.
Right. And I've seen where it's like bouncing around inside the network first. I'm like, what is happening here? That's not normal.
Well, that's a problem. When it's bouncing back and forth, you've got a routing loop, which, if you're seeing that, you've got a pretty sophisticated network. And you shouldn't be setting up routes by yourself. That's for the long beards, as we call them.
The long beards. We'll get to those guys. Hold on. Yeah. All right. Hey, the other one that's always kind of hand in hand with ping is like, okay, let's do an IP config and see what's happening here. I mean, so IP config is going to give you a little bit more. IP config all gives you more information than, just kind of opening up a bunch of, boxes on a Windows box or something else, right? So again, I'm falling back to kind of the lower level tier technicians are kind of like, okay, IP config. I'm looking at the configuration of the network adapter, right? Or the router or the switch. What are we looking at here, Alex? And how do we quickly identify or clear out some cobwebs?
So if you're on the machine and you don't have an IP address, there's a problem upstream. It's either you've got no physical connectivity, your DHCP server is broken. If you got one of those weird Windows ones, I think it's 169.254, that means, again, you don't really have an IP. That's like a magic IP address.
Yep.
When you do a IP config all, it starts to tell you some more interesting stuff. Like, I guess we do have the subnet mask here, but you want to know the default gateway, right? That is important. You want to understand where the traffic is it's supposed to be going to exit, to egress the network. So, how do you turn it on, turn it off? You IP config release, you IP config renew, right? That's how you try and restart that DHCP process. If you want to go crazy, you can try setting a manual IP to try and see if there's connectivity. And we'll talk about some more advanced techniques in a little bit. But again, IP config's your friend. IF config if you're a Linux guy.
Yep. Yep, and it's interesting. The screenshot here does not show the gateway, so that's the big thing we're looking for.
That's a problem.
That's a problem. We're not going anywhere if we don't have a gateway here. So yeah. All right, NS lookup. How? This one is.
This is your favorite.
Yeah, this is gold right here, right? Looking up a specific IP address associated with a domain name. If you're not able to resolve, that's when we can say, oh, let's look at DNS, right?
For sure. So yeah, here's where I bested one of my my senior sales engineers here at Auvik. We were on site at a vendor hosting an event, and he's like, I can't get on the network, can't get on the network. Their authentication's broken, it's broken. I was like, you can't get on there because you can't seem to get redirected to to their auth server, which is local DNS. Did you override your DNS with Google? He's like, yeah. I'm like, well, there's your problem, right? It's not only do you have DNS, do you have the right DNS? So DHCP, when you get onto a network, it will tell you what DNS server to use. Yeah. And that's really important in a larger organization because you might have fancy tools like Umbrella installed, or pick your favorite one. I'm not very religious about this, but you have defaults. And it's important to use those defaults because the systems are built on top of each other. If I can't access internal resources, like it's a domain server, like, domain server.local, I won't be able to get that if I'm using Google DNS. So, hey, make sure they have the right one in play there. So it's important to see, not only can you look it up, but what server are we using? That's very important.
Yeah, and tip for everybody, if you're not already doing it, lock down those network settings so that the users can't change them, because I was also thinking while you're talking, Alex, about the complexity that VPNs introduce, and maybe on the next one we'll do an advanced version of this, but we didn't put any kind of VPN troubleshooting.
VPNs suck. So
would have been but it's out there, right? So would have been.
It is out there. We'll talk about how with Auvik in a little bit we can detect rogue DNS. So I'll get into that once we get to the demo. I know there's some attendees who are pretty eager, but we'll get to that. Patience, please. Got to get the first principles underway.
Absolutely. Everybody's jumping in with, what about this? So yeah, keep those questions coming. We'll cover them. All right, Netstat, another, common tool in the toolkit here, right? So looking at the current state of the connection and then what's happening with that connection, right?
I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of TCP, SYN, ACK, time, wait, all those kind of different phases. Like, oh man, I studied that stuff in university an eon ago. However, the cool part here is, hey, do we have a connection, right? That's what we're trying to figure out. Are we connected and it's an application problem, or is it a network problem? So for example, here we've got the first line there, it's connected to 172.17, whatever that is, but it's established. It's cut off there, but it says it's established, which means there's a layer 3 or layer 4, I should say, connection, which is good. And maybe it's a layer 7 problem that the app, whatever that app is not working. So why would you use this? You want to see if you've got a connection. If you've got a connection, then it's not the network, it's something else. If it's, it's trying to establish, I forget the phases right now off the top of my head, but if you can't get a connection here and you don't have one, there's your problem. I think it's in state SYN. Then it's just trying and you're not getting a response. Then it's likely a firewall issue. So
yeah. And then what port is associated with that connection, right? So you got 443 on here. I see 80, etc. Good stuff.
Yep.
Route. All right. So the routing table, right, Alex?
Yes, routing tables. Yeah, as your earlier example alluded to, routing sucks. Routing is something that you shouldn't be doing by hand. You want to let the firewall do as much of this by itself, to the extent that you're trying to segregate networks for security reasons. Like, oh yeah, you can do it, but once you start to get into routing, it's a pain. And to the extent that you can avoid complex protocols like OSPF, like they do make it better, but don't use these protocols if you have 2 subnets. Try and avoid it. Most Cisco or pick your favorite routers that have layer 3 switching or built-in routing capabilities on firewall, they'll handle all the routes for you automatically. So if you get to that device, it'll take care of it. But what we're looking at here is the most important thing is, do I have a default gateway? Right? If you don't have a default gateway, then your traffic's never going to egress the network. So why would I look at a route table? I'm trying to find out if there's a path from me to the internet, and you'll start to see things populating here. So usually the default gateway is represented by 0000 with a net mask of 000, and it tells you what IP. Again, unless you've got a larger network, maybe 50 to 100 employee organization, you shouldn't have to deal with routing. And if you do, yeah, it's not the most fun when it starts to go wonky.
Yeah, don't monkey with it unless you really know what you're doing. All right, here it is, the show command.
Ah, my favorite.
There's
so,
yeah,
so like,
hundreds.
we've been very PC focused, very endpoint focused, but that's not always where the problem lies. Um, you could be having an issue with a device itself. So we just got a little screenshot here of logging into a device. This happens to be a Cisco-esque device.
Yep.
There's a lot of commands that are very analogous to what exists on the PC. Show interfaces, give you a list of all the interfaces, whether they're up or down. If they have an IP, great. The routing, the running config is the configuration of that device. That's very important to understand, as you can try and figure out what VLAN ports are on or whether they're configured to be up. If you're having to spend time in here, I mean, it's worth doing some courses online, Coursera, pick your favorite thing. But really just, it's good to have a basic understanding. Like we're going through some very light first principles today, but just understanding what a VLAN is, how to configure it, what's the difference between an access and a trunk. Like these things, if you have to go deal with them, you really need to understand what they mean. And so I think it's worth, if I would assume many of you already understand that stuff, but if you don't, it's worth spending an hour one day and just go doing a basic networking course. And in fact, for Auvik partners, we do have a networking 101 on our training portals. Just gives you, the first principles. Very, very useful stuff.
Yeah, definitely check that out. Very, very important just to understand the basic networking principles, because without that basic understanding, I mean, it's, hit and miss troubleshooting later. All right. So
yeah, DNS, your favorite.
Old school, flush the DNS cache.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know how much this happens. I'm not a DNS expert, but to the extent that this happens, it's usually local issues. Where I've seen you needed to flush the DNS. If it's the internet, usually the TTL is configured to be short enough so you don't have to deal with a flushing DNS. It's usually when you've got host name set up internally and things are moving around. That's where you see problems. I can't resolve domain server.local because it's moved, right? What's been your experience, Eric?
Well, I think sometimes when I've used this a lot has been when we're making some changes on the DNS and the DHCP servers and stuff, and we want to force something really quick. Sometimes the devices aren't picking it up, so even after a reboot, so we'll just flush it. IP, config, release, renew, flush the DNS cache, and then see if we can pick up the new handoff from the servers. Yeah,
that makes sense.
Clear ARP. Here's one that I wasn't really up to speed on in my early networking days until I couldn't figure out making changes on routers and switches, and stuff just wasn't like happening. And then I learned, after getting on support with some, high-speed Cisco guys on their support plans, they're like, oh yeah, let's clear the ARP. Boom. Wow. That was like magic to me. I'm like, really? It was awesome.
Yeah. So I'll do the 10-second introduction to what ARP is. It's the address resolution protocol. So when I say as my computer, I want to reach 192.168.1.2, I have to resolve that into either the next hop at the physical layer. So what MAC address do I talk to? So either the router is going to respond to that IP address resolution request, or the machine itself. And the machine will give back a MAC address. And, actually we don't communicate IP to IP. We communicate MAC to MAC. Most people don't really know that. It's the physical layer that is where all the communication happens. So ARP is the way to see if you're resolving that. So if you do an ARP, you can see all the different machines that your computer is talking to. Most of the time it's local, but if you're trying to trace down some connectivity issues locally, ARP is your friend. It's going to tell you whether it can resolve, and it can see the response there. And we'll get into stuff like TCP dump later. That is my favorite tool, bar none. However, ARP is your friend.
Yeah, and sometimes you'll go in there and you'll go, holy cow, there's machines in here that have been removed from the network like forever ago. Why is it still showing up? That kind of stuff.
Get it. Reboot.
clean up all of them cobwebs. Yeah, well, I'm dating myself. Don't reboot that server ever, right? Remember those days?
Yeah.
Oh, and here's the one that's kind of like the check the cable thing, where you're like, man, you're doing all this troubleshooting, and then you come to find out, oh my goodness, we're out of IP addresses or what, right? So looking at the DHCP scope on servers and on firewalls and routers and switches, however you're handing that stuff off, right?
So yeah, DHCP is one of those things. It actually happened to us at our office. You know, you scale, you set up a subnet for 255 addresses, so the /24 there that we got in your little picture there. And eventually, with just the sheer number of wireless devices, you can fill that up fairly quickly. And what happens there then is that you get an unintended denial of service attack again. Not attack, you just get a denial of service because no one can enter the network because we're out of IP addresses. So how do you solve that? You increase the scope. So it's very important to understand this, particularly when you're prospecting a new client and you're trying to take them on. Make note of the size of the subnets, because that's something that, again, lies dormant until one day some new employee shows up and all of a sudden they can't get on the network, and you're going to spend hours tracing it down. You're not going to think to check the subnet size. So we'll talk about how Auvik can help later, but that is certainly one thing to add to your documentation checklist, specifically during your network assessment phase or prospecting phase.
Right. And then talk about kind of the rogue thing that happens, right? When you look at somebody's device and they're like, that IP address is not even in our scope. What's happening here? Right. It's kind of that.
Yeah, that's more complicated.
Yeah. Well, the story I told where the employee came in and, just jacked in their own, wireless router and things like that. But yeah. And, now with the advent, like I don't know about everybody on the call here, but I've really gotten into home automation in a big way, and I've run out of IP addresses on my home router because there's so much now being managed, and all of these, devices that we walk around with. I mean, smartphones, tablets, laptops, Apple TVs, Google machine, whatever you've got. I've had to increase my scope a couple of times because you have no idea that, and then everybody wants to be on, and I open up a guest network because my kids have their friends over. It's interesting. And the IoT that's going on now in businesses, of course, is
specifically for home networks. You really want to have that guest network. You want to have your main network. And then for all those IoT devices, you want to keep them on a separate VLAN, a separate, like effectively a guest network, but for devices. Those devices have no need to talk to anything else on your network other than themselves, IoT to IoT. So that's more of a security tip there. They don't need to be on the same network, because what happens, and I'm going off topic, what happens is these things run old versions of Linux typically, and they're susceptible to CVEs. And so if some malware creeps into your PC because you opened something you shouldn't have, it's gonna look for devices it can jump into and lay dormant until it's time to launch its attack. And it's gonna look for those legacy devices. So.
You bet. I know in the earlier days of IoT, I mean, these cameras and things were all being, botted and taken over. And I mean, it's crazy. So yeah, do not have anything exclude that from participation on your home network, and create your different, and most of the, better, prosumer routers give you the ability to create these different segments and not let them participate with each other. So that's cool. All right, so let's get into some of that Longbeard stuff now. We've talked about some, old school, basic. This is what you got to have in your toolkit all the time. Now we're going to migrate into kind of some of the advanced stuff, and this is, these are the tools that what I call the dragon slaying engineers, are really, excited to get into, and they skip all that stuff. They jump into some of this super, advanced stuff that again we don't really. You've got to prove yourself to get to that kind of training and be really good at using these tools. So here's my quick dragon slaying engineer graphic that I was alluding to earlier.
Yes, we're both very proud of that one.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, so let's talk about SNMP. I've done through my 8 years countless demos with people, and SNMP is one of those things that not as many people know about, and they really should. So SNMP is an agentless protocol that sits on almost all networking gear. It allows you to query a device and get back information. Now, I've specifically shown a graphic here that is very command line centric without the MIBs. This is how you get data. Now, there's lots of great tools out there, Auvik included, that allow you to make this a lot simpler. But again, it's about understanding first principles. When you're talking to a device, if you want to find out all its IPs, if you want to find out its make and model, there's ways to get it out of it from the command line that's really useful.
Mhm.
There's tons of really great stuff you can get. We'll talk about that later, but it's an important tool in your tool belt to be able to understand what a device is, what it's doing without having to really log into it. I think that's the important part.
Yep. All right. Here's your
All right,
favorite.
my favorite. Anyone who's worked with me says this, you know, if there's a network problem, there's nothing you can't solve without TCP down for Wireshark. So whether you're a Linux geek or a Windows user, doesn't really matter. So just again, the level set, these tools allow you to capture every single packet, whether it's ARP, layer 7, HTTP, and inspect it across the network. Like if you have the ability to capture traffic, you can understand what's going wrong. And I'll highlight this with an example. I was working with a very large partner of ours down in Florida. They had deployed Auvik at a large institution, and they said, "Hey, we took down the network." And I was like, "Ooh, that's not good." So I got on the phone with them, got on screen shares. I'm like, "Dude, this does not look like Auvik. It's like every time we turn it on, the network goes down." I'm like, that can't be right. So eventually, like I'm convinced it wasn't us, but hey, you never know. We did a packet capture, and what we found was it wasn't Auvik that was creating the problem. It was the fact that we were doing a network scan periodically, and the act of doing a network scan, as we talked about with ARP, you do an ARP request. And we found through TCP dump that there were 2 rogue devices that were responding to every single ARP request. So they're not supposed to respond to an ARP request unless it's addressed to you, but they responded to everything, which multiplied the amount of broadcast traffic, which eventually caused a problem, i.e. a network issue. So that one was like, again, I earned my long beard on that one because we were able to eventually just unplug those 2 printers, and all of a sudden the network was like super stable. So, hey, you know, being able to get in here and understand what's going on. It's also really interesting if you're just doing it on your own PC to see what applications your PC is communicating on the internet. This is how people detect a lot of malware. They just look at the traffic. You shut off all your apps, and you see traffic going to some weird IP address. You can start to look at it. You can follow it and see what's going on. Like, yeah, it's a really, really powerful tool.
Yeah. And doing that on your local machine, it can freak you out. Like
There's a lot of stuff going on.
There's a lot going on. It's like, what's going on?
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. This is super sexy graphic here, Alex.
Yes. I was like, well, let's make this look as technical as possible. So back in the day when people had, you know, regular telephone calls, there was this concept of call data records, right? So you pick up the phone, it creates a record when you call somebody. There's an equivalent to that in the networking world. It's called NetFlow. NetFlow allows you to create call data records, or the equivalent thereof, for network traffic. So if we, you know, actually, Eric, just go back one slide for a second.
Yep.
So if we look at this network traffic here, this is just ICMP and some UDP. You know, every time a new connection is established, you can get a call data record, a NetFlow record for that. You can, depending on how you configure NetFlow, it'll tell you that this IP talked to that IP for this long, with this many bytes on these ports. It's pretty powerful when you're trying to understand forensically what's going on in your network. So for example, if we just go back or go forward one more slide, like I can see the 5 tuple, I can see the TCP traffic, the UDP traffic, I can see how many bytes are traversing through a network. And when you do this at the vantage point of the firewall, I get visibility into all the connections across my network. Hey, shameless plug, we're going to talk about this with Traffic Insights in a few seconds, but this is a very powerful thing. And it's not like it's a power user's tool. I mean, it is a power user's tool, but almost every single firewall that we see in the MSP channel, it has NetFlow support today. Socket, Fortinet, Cisco, Sophos, all of them, they support this. It's just not something that most people use because it's a bit of a pain in the ass to set up. Excuse my language, but it's true.
For sure. All right. So here's my next poll for everybody. Do you invest? I'm not talking about the free tools that we showed you, but do you invest in any networking troubleshooting tools to help increase efficiencies and scale your business today? So I'm going to ask everybody to reach out, grab your mouse, click on the appropriate answer so that we can frame our conversation up more appropriately as we move into the next section. So, you know, I remember, you know, back in the day, Alex, when I was just learning. And, you know, we really, you know, I came from the enterprise prior to, you know, launching my IT practice and then ultimately transforming into an MSP. And I wasn't prepared for the cost of some of these tools that we were using in the enterprise, as I moved into kind of private practice, if you will, and going, holy cow, I had no idea that this stuff cost that much. So it almost forced us to, really leverage kind of the free and utilities and things that were available from the different vendors. But I think today, as we continue to leverage tools that are basically custom designed for the MSPs. That was the problem before. These tools were just for the enterprise. And, like for Auvik, you've basically taken a lot of these capabilities and made them accessible for the MSP model. And that certainly wasn't the case back in 2004 when I was trying to launch my MSP. So it was really challenging for us to, invest and see the ROI from some of these really heavy duty, costly tools back then.
Yes, I think Steve Ballmer said it best. Linux is free like a puppy, right? You can get free tools. Again, Nagios, not PureTG is not free, but a bunch of tools like that. That's great. What you're saving in dollars, you're sacrificing in time. And so
yep.
That's really why, you should consider this if you want to scale quickly. Like I love to say the Erick Simpson story. If you want to scale quickly, you want to be spending your energy on things that create value, not on configuration tools, whether it's an RMM or whatever. You don't want to be spending your time on those activities, on minimum value tools.
Right.
So let me quickly introduce Auvik. So Auvik is a network management solution tailor-built for the MSP channel. We help our partners get better visibility into their clients' networks. And I'm going to jump in and give you a super quick demo because I want to help you understand what we do. And then I'm going to talk about Traffic Insights, which is something new we've launched to help you understand exactly what's happening on your network. I talked about NetFlow earlier. Yeah, let's dive into that. Let's understand what traffic is traversing our network. So I'm cognizant of the time. I want to make sure we get some time for Q&A. So if you want to just advance to the next slide, Eric, I'm just going to quickly introduce what Traffic Insight is and how it's a little bit different than just traditional NetFlow. We made an acquisition last year that takes basically the raw NetFlow records and augments them and enriches them to give us better visibility into the actual applications. It's not just port 80, it's Facebook traffic or port 443. We know where that traffic is going, and it wouldn't be a complete solution for the MSP unless it was multi-tenant. So I'm rushing a little bit, but Eric, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me show you what this is. So I'm going to start not with Traffic Insights, but let me just start with this is Auvik, right? So this is our network back home. I'm actually working from home right now, back at the office. So the left side of this is the corporate network. The right side of this is our lab. And what you're seeing here is a layer 1 network topology map. We've figured out what all these devices are automatically. We've been able to figure out what they are, where they're physically plugged into without having to go trace any cables. What we've been able to do is just deploy our collector. It's a piece of software you install at your client location. It does the scans, and it's going to figure all this stuff out. Now, this is not an Auvik demo today. I do want to spend my time on Traffic Insights because this is the really interesting stuff, right? As we think about the dependence on networking, Auvik itself as a company, we use 50 to 100 different SaaS applications. We are so dependent on the network, the stability of that network. And I joke that our team turns into meerkats. They jump up out of their seats if there's any inkling of a network outage. And so it's so important to understand what's traversing through your network, not only from a security point of view, which we'll talk about in a minute, but just what are we doing? When do we slice it? What traffic's going through? So this is literally a live view of our network. I'm looking at the last 24 hours. There's a lot of encrypted traffic. So that's interesting. Let's drill into that. Let's see what types of traffic are traversing through our network. Not surprisingly, a lot of SSL. Let's drill into that. Why am I doing this? I'm trying to understand and answer the question, hey, is this just my team going off, surfing the web, playing with Facebook or whatever? Or is it business application traffic? I've done this demo once before, and I noticed a bunch of Dropbox traffic. And I was like, hey, we don't use Dropbox. And I was able to trace it back to one of our content people. I was like, hey, Jen, why are you using Dropbox? She's like, how the hell did you know that? And I was like, well, we're using our Traffic Insight. She's like, oh, well, I guess at that time I was uploading a file to one of our partners. They wanted to review a PowerPoint. I was like, hey, there you go. We're able to figure that. Why do I care? That's a business policy, right? Do we use these apps? Now, that's a security lens, but as an MSP. Maybe I have a tool. Maybe I'm using one of the, maybe there's an MSP friendly solution there for file sharing. Maybe I could sell them something so we have a company standard. So let's take a look at this, right? I'm looking at all the different SSL traffic. I see a lot of Facebook. That's interesting. I want to go in and take a look at who are the top users. So yes, we've got a lot of Facebook traffic. Let's see who's doing it. So wait for that to load. We've got Ken, we've got John. These are PCs in our lab. That's interesting. So let me clear that. Let's see who our top users are on the network. We're trying to answer the question, if my network's slow, who's the heavy hitter? We've seen crazy examples of backup devices who are misconfigured to upload all of their traffic all the time to the backup server. And a simple quick fix allowed them to, simply having this visibility allowed them to go in and just reconfigure their backup appliance to do that at nighttime, rather than hogging the bandwidth during the day. So I'm just drilling around here. We see a lot of Apple traffic here, a lot of Facebook, a lot of Google video, even more Apple. And a lot of this probably just has to do with there's probably an Apple update being pushed out today. So that's kind of interesting. Let's touch on one more thing, which is my favorite, the geolocation. So IPs are highly correlated to location. And so I'm able to, in this view, which I think is great from a sales pitch point of view, I'm able to see where my traffic is flowing. So got a lot of traffic in Canada, that's where we are, a lot of traffic to the US, but ooh, got some traffic to Russia. What's up with that? So let's drill in on that. Let's see what machine is going to Russia. So we can take that filter, country source Russia. We can go to the top end now, see what's going on. Whoops. Did I click something? I clicked something. Uh-oh. Demo fail. Just stop clicking, Alex.
So an IP of .33 when you...
All right, hold on one sec. Go back here. All right, so we got people going to 3dnews.ru. Well, that's weird. We've got Yandex, that's a search engine. Maybe that's appropriate. And I see that there's a 10, 20, 33. Well, that didn't resolve in the map automatically, but let's go back into core Auvik and let's see what that machine is. Is that expected? To be fair, I haven't pre-scripted this, so it looks like that machine's no longer online. Well, that's interesting. There might be something funky going on, right? So it gives us some visibility to understand what's going on. It was not a ton of traffic. It was only 700 kilobits. It could have just been a machine. We got Adrian's machine here sending some traffic. That's weird. We can drill in and understand that. What else we want to talk about? We got about 10 minutes left. So Erick, maybe I'll pause just for a second here. Maybe you want to throw out some quick questions that'll help you think will help your audience here. Otherwise, I'll just keep rambling and talking about Auvik.
Yeah, so let's see. I'll pull a couple of specific questions that might align with where we are right now. So how does Traffic Insights detect applications from NetFlow? How did you guys engineer that? Yeah,
so NetFlow, as we said, is the 5-tuple. I'll actually show you that. So you get the source IP, dest IP, source port, destination port, and the protocol. Protocol is TCP or UDP. Mm-hmm. So what's interesting about that is you can apply some machine learning techniques and you can teach it. All right, so if I know that this destination is Apple's or Facebook CDN, I can teach it that. I can look at DPI. Packet capture. So I can say that, hey, all this traffic, it has the characteristics of, let's say, BitTorrent as an example. There's a lot of flows, short-lived, a lot of IP addresses with these characteristics. I can categorize that and use DPI techniques to train our system to detect that as BitTorrent. So we've got this really, really cool system that learns the traffic, and we teach it what protocols look like, and then it's able to figure out. It's not 100% accurate, because it's not doing DPI. That's not what we do. But it's able to get to a really high degree of accuracy to try and understand what traffic is traversing through your network, what applications. Go back to that so you can see. So we can see what VoIP traffic, right? What VoIP, we have SIP providers. I said earlier that we could detect DNS. I could see, like if I wanted to see if there's any rogue DNS, I would filter out all the DNS traffic and I would see what destinations that traffic is going to. Is it going to 88888 or is it going to my sanctioned DNS, for example? So there's lots of cool forensic capabilities that you can use to help troubleshoot networks. I'll stop talking now. because I've done a lot of that. I saw a whole bunch of Q&A pop up, so maybe I'll pause now.
Yeah, there's a bunch of questions here. And so what about protocols? So what protocols are we monitoring here?
So NetFlow is kind of the encompassing umbrella of NetFlow v9, v5, IPFix. We support SFlow. Almost all firewalls, as I said, and even some switches support these. You just go into them. We have lots of articles that shows you how to configure that. And you can go in there and you can enable that on your devices and capture this traffic and get that enriched view of what's happening at your client's site.
Got it. And here's a good one. So all of this is enabled through the Auvik agent, or is there a separate appliance? I mean, how do you collect it all?
So yeah, you configure your firewall to point at our Auvik collector. It's a tiny little Windows executable, or if you want, you can use the VM. They're functionally equivalent. You point the NetFlow at that collector. It does some aggregation of that records, and it uploads it to our cloud. So if you ever lose those collectors, you don't lose any of the historical data here. You have that long-term visibility. So it's really, really easy to set up. You can do a whole network discovery in 15 minutes, configure that firewall, and get some visibility into what applications are traversing the network in under an hour.
Wow. Here's a great question. So is there a way to leverage Auvik as a marketing tool to lure or engage a potential or new prospect? Like if you were going to present this to a new prospect to be in an MSP, what would you collected data, what would be like the top 3 things you would show somebody to say, yes, I need to have that, or I'm okay with, moving to a higher tier of service so that you can apply this type of visibility to what's going on in the network?
Yeah. So like when we work with MSPs, it's not about selling the software. It's not like you need to buy this tool. It's about the insights that you glean from having this visibility. It's for you. It's for you to help deliver a better and more awesome service to your clients. So if you're doing this discovery and you find out there's a whole bunch of unmanaged switches, that's something you can use to say, hey, you need to buy managed switches because you've got a ticking time bomb under your desk there. That's a problem just waiting to happen. Or you can detect, oh, we've got all these old out of warranty switches that need to be replaced because if they die, again, I can't get these replaced. We need to be proactive. We need to put this budget line item in. So it's not about the tool, it's about the insights the tool provides. But yeah, that's kind of the value add. And then certainly with the protocol visibility, trying to understand that whether the internet's slow or not. So I'll map that back to a business problem. Just because the internet's slow, is that a function of we've grown so much that we need to upgrade capacity, or can we reframe that as a business policy and say, hey, look, there's a lot of streaming video during the day. We just need to put a shaper on that and then not worry about increasing capacity, increasing the spend. So it gives you data to support decisions. Like, I don't know about you, but if you ever talk to your CFO and you said, I want to spend more money, they're going to want a lot more justification as to what and why, and show me the data to back up that decision.
Right.
So Auvik will help you with that part.
Yeah, I think, just deploying it and then monitoring your clients' networks, you will figure out how to maximize the value that it brings you and give you that trusted advisor perspective on things that can help optimize the network. I mean, I can even imagine scenarios, Alex, where a client says, I need more bandwidth. And you say, well, not really. Let's just make these policy changes and save you that money, right? And add tremendous amount of value to that relationship.
Yeah, I think it's really about just trying to do the right thing for your partner, right? And then from your perspective, you can do all this stuff by hand if you want. We've shown you some of the tools and techniques, that the Longbeards will use if they want to get in there. But as an MSP, your time is worth so much. And so is it not worth investing in tools to automate some of the collection of this data? Again, Auvik or backup disaster recovery or RMM, like these are all solving the same problem, which is like, let's take the remedial tasks, let's automate them away, and let's focus on some real stuff to help go win new clients.
Yep. All right. Why don't we jump over back into the slide deck for a couple of last slides. We'll do some Q&A on that side. And let's see, share. Where are you, my slide? Here we are. All right. So you've provided some really great content today, got us thinking, Alex. You're also providing our attendees your ebook titled Keeping Client Networks Healthy and Secure with Auvik Traffic Insights. There's a link here. We'll also send these links in a follow-up. And then here's a link to book a demo. Now, the ebook really aligns with a question that we have from an attendee that asks, how can this help with HIPAA security? Can you give us a use case?
I am not a HIPAA expert. I can talk about PCI compliance because I know a lot more about that. So with PCI compliance, you need to make sure that the network, so the payment terminals, anything that has to do with payment processing is completely segregated from any traffic that is, I would say, the regular traffic. So you have to be able to prove that. So core Auvik, the regular Auvik solution, will allow you to identify what devices are, you have to help us with this, but like, what's a payment processing device? And you can see if it's on the right VLAN or it's on the right switches, whether it's physically and separated. Now, the NetFlow visibility will help you understand what traffic, and is the right, is there traffic going to, I don't know, I don't have a good example. I haven't done this myself, but, to a payment processing gateway. Is that coming from the regular network, or is it coming from the quote unquote PCI network? My understanding of HIPAA is really about ensuring that personally identifying information is kept secure. We don't go into any personally identifiable information. So that's why I'm not sure I'm equipped to answer that from a network perspective, but if there's further feedback, I'm happy to have a chat.
Yeah. Let's, so while we continue doing Q&A, I have one last poll for everyone, and it'll just give us an idea of what your thoughts are in terms of engaging with Alex and his team. So if you take a few seconds to answer the poll for us, we'll know the appropriate way to follow up with you. So I don't really, so on the HIPAA side, that's all dealing with PII and PHI, and, we're really not inspecting the data packets themselves other than, not unpacking and seeing what's in there. So we don't know whether, sensitive files or PII is being moved from one place to another. I guess one thing you could do is make sure that all of your sensitive PII and PHI information in your client's environments are encrypted and kept in a certain location on the network. And I guess if you see a lot of traffic moving back and forth from that particular location or IP address where that stuff is hosted, that might kind of raise a flag and say, okay, what's happening here? I can't think of any other real way to tie that in from a HIPAA perspective. But certainly,
Eric, just to interrupt, the poll disappeared before anyone could answer it. Is it possible to bring that back up again?
Oh yeah, what happened? Relaunching. Okay, can you see it now? All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was weird. So that's the only way I can really think about that. So do us a favor, everyone, and let us know how you'd like to engage with Alex and his team. But certainly from a the network analysis and troubleshooting and optimization and identifying these other things that can be a security issue, right? Rogue devices, where the traffic is going. I mean, if it's not supposed to be going somewhere, like we were looking at earlier in your example, why is that? Who's accessing it? What time is it happening? What type of port is being accessed, et cetera, right? So that's really, I think, from a security perspective, which the number one concern of small and medium business today is security. I think it adds a tremendous amount of value, and it increases your value as the trusted advisor, the MSP for your client, having your hands on this type of information, having more strategic conversations with clients as regards to their network and network security. All right. So we're just a minute over time, Alex. So I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. Thank you, everyone, for participating. And you will receive a follow-up email with a recording of today's session and all of the downloads that we promise you for participating. Alex, I want to thank you again for a lively and entertaining and kind of, back to basics and bringing us back to our core networking sensibilities, from your presentation, and appreciate you sharing with everyone on today's webcast. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Pleasure to talk about stuff that I'm very passionate about.
Thanks everyone for attending. We'll see you on the next webinar. Take care.